We need fresh thinking, not dinosaurs stuck in the past, Wade Foster declared, pointing directly at me during the Monday production meeting. The conference room went dead silent. 22 employees suddenly found their clipboards fascinating. At 54, I was the oldest guy there by nearly 20 years. I'm Howard Mills, by the way. Been building things with my hands since I got out of the Marines 30 years ago. Started this company with Eugene Walsh when we were just two guys with big dreams and empty pockets, working out of a rented garage. Look, I kept my hands steady on the table, looked Wade right in the eye and smiled. Interesting approach. Those words hung there while everything I'd built over 25 years just crumbled under his dismissive stare. I gathered my project folders and walked out, keeping my shoulders straight like they taught me in the Corps. A few of the younger guys shot me apologetic looks, but nobody said a word. That night I sat on my back porch, working on a chair I was building from scratch. My phone kept buzzing with messages from concerned coworkers, but I couldn't deal with it yet. Not until I figured out exactly how to handle this situation. See, Wade had no idea who he was really messing with, or that in 3 days at our company anniversary dinner, he'd learned that the dinosaur he just dismissed actually owned 25% of the entire operation. Before I tell you what happened next, stick with me here, because what went down wasn't just about getting even. It was about something way more important that changed not just my life, but how an entire company treated the people who actually knew how to build things. I've spent 25 years developing manufacturing processes that keep American factories competitive, don't need recognition, just the satisfaction of solving real problems. I drive a practical truck, live in a comfortable house I built myself, and my only indulgences are my woodworking shop and the classic Mustang I've been restoring for 10 years. Here's how it all started. I joined up with Eugene fresh out of the service when we were both young and stupid enough to think we could take on the world. He was brilliant with innovation but terrible with the business side. I remember our first meeting in that garage, him frantically trying to fix a broken drill press. "If you can make this work," he joked, "I'll make you a partner." Took me 15 minutes to find the loose belt and tighten it up. "Sometimes the simplest problems have the simplest solutions," I told him. He looked at me funny and said, "Apply that thinking to our production line, and you'll save this company." 6 months later, I did exactly that. Working late shifts after the day crew went home, I developed a process improvement that cut waste by 18% and boosted productivity by 15%. When the company stabilized and started making real money, Eugene insisted I take equity instead of just a salary bump. "You saved us, Howard. This makes sure you'll always have a say in how we do business." For 23 years, that promise held true. Then Wade Foster showed up 8 months ago. Wade was 36, had an MBA from some fancy school, and walked around like he owned the place from his perfectly styled hair to his expensive shoes. The board brought him in as innovation manager to modernize our operations. Within weeks, he'd rearranged the shop floor to separate older workers from younger ones, implemented rapid improvement cycles that favored quick fixes over proven methods, and started systematically pushing out anyone over 45. "Manufacturing is evolving too fast for traditional thinking," he announced at his first all-hands meeting. "We need people who understand modern efficiency, not outdated approaches." You know how it is when you see something wrong happening, but everyone just keeps their heads down? That's what this was like. I watched quietly as experienced machinists were forced out through impossible deadlines, exclusion from planning meetings, and public criticism of their methods. Each departure got explained as natural attrition or failure to adapt to new standards. HR, recently restaffed with Wade's former colleagues, rubber-stamped every termination. My project, a cost-saving process I'd been perfecting for months, got reassigned to Perry Stone, a recent engineering graduate. When I offered my documentation to help with the handoff, Wade cut me off. "We're looking for innovative solutions, not legacy thinking," he said, steering Perry away. "Don't worry about Howard's notes. Start fresh with modern approaches." That night, I started keeping detailed records. Every age-discriminatory comment, every impossible deadline, every exclusion from key meetings. Not for a lawsuit, I had something bigger in mind. So anyway, the following week, Wade reorganized the production floor again. My workstation got moved to a corner near the supply room, away from my team. My system access got restricted to view only. In our digital project workspace, my input went ignored. "It's nothing personal," Wade told me during my performance review. "We're pivoting toward digital natives who understand modern manufacturing." I nodded calmly. I understand completely. At home, I kept refining my efficiency system on my own time. The core processes were mine, developed years before with documentation proving ownership. What the company didn't know was this system could reduce operational costs by $2.5 million annually, while boosting productivity by 15%. 3 days after being called a dinosaur, I prepared for our 25th anniversary celebration. Instead of my usual work clothes, I put on the good suit I'd bought for my daughter's wedding, but rarely wore. When I walked into the venue, a restored warehouse downtown, conversations stopped briefly as colleagues did double takes. Perry approached first. "Howard, you clean up? Nice. Thanks, kid. Special occasions call for special effort." Across the room, Wade was holding court with board members, gesturing dramatically as he described his vision for the company's future. He hadn't noticed me yet. Eugene spotted me from across the room and walked over with that big grin that had convinced me to start this company with him. Though he's 67 now, he still had the energy that built our operation from nothing. "There he is," he announced, giving me a firm handshake. My secret weapon all these years. Wade glanced over, his expression shifting from confusion to professional interest when he saw me talking with the founder. Eugene took my arm. "Come say hello to the board. Most of these new members have never met the guy who saved this company." As we approached Wade's group, Eugene raised his voice slightly. "Everyone knows Howard, of course. Without him, none of us would be standing here today." Wade's expression stayed pleasant but puzzled. "Wade," Eugene continued, "you've been working with Howard, right? Has he told you his story?" "We've collaborated on several projects," Wade replied smoothly, though we'd done nothing of the sort. "Excellent," Eugene beamed. "Then you know you're working with the guy who saved this company and still owns 25% of it." Wade's drink nearly slipped from his hand. His face went pale as the pieces clicked. 25%, he repeated. "Howard could have been CEO if he wanted," Eugene continued cheerfully, missing Wade's discomfort entirely. "Instead, he keeps developing brilliant systems. Speaking of which, how's that efficiency project coming? The board's eager to see results." Before Wade could answer, I smiled. "Actually, I've been developing some new approaches I'd like to share with everyone. Maybe at tomorrow's executive meeting?" Eugene clapped his hands. "Perfect, Wade. Make sure that's first on the agenda." The rest of the evening, I felt Wade's eyes following me. He made several attempts to corner me privately, but I stayed engaged with other colleagues, many surprised to learn about my ownership stake. "Here's the thing, you still with me? Because what happens next isn't just about revealing my stake. That was just the setup. The real story is how one moment of disrespect led to a complete transformation nobody saw coming." Next morning, I arrived early to set up for the executive meeting. The boardroom gradually filled with curious faces, some I'd known for decades, others hired under Wade's new vision. Eugene sat at the head with Wade positioned strategically nearby. When Wade saw me setting up my presentation, he approached with an overly warm smile. "Howard, I want to apologize for any misunderstandings. If I'd known about your history with the company, no apologies necessary," I interrupted gently. "Today isn't about the past." Eugene called the meeting to order. "Howard has something important that could transform our operations. Everyone give him your full attention." I connected my laptop to the projector and stood. "For the past year, I've been developing an efficiency system that will revolutionize how we manufacture. It eliminates redundancies, streamlines workflow, and increases productivity while reducing worker fatigue." I clicked through slides showing impressive metrics from my private testing. The room leaned forward, recognizing the potential impact. "This looks remarkable," Glenn Cross, our CFO, commented. "When can we implement it?" "That's what I want to discuss," I replied. "This system isn't company property. I developed the core concepts on my own time with extensive documentation proving ownership." Confusion rippled through the room. Wade's expression hardened as he realized where this was heading. "I'm offering to license this system to the company," I continued, "not give it away. The annual savings will exceed $2.5 million based on conservative estimates." "Name your price," Glenn said immediately. "My terms aren't financial," I replied, meeting Wade's gaze. "I want oversight by a new age diversity committee with binding authority over hiring and promotion. I want mandatory respect training for all employees, especially management. And I want an apprenticeship program pairing experienced workers with new hires, ensuring knowledge transfer goes both ways." The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Eugene smiled knowingly. "Howard isn't asking for money, he's asking for cultural change." This is highly unusual, Wade interjected. Creating new governance structures based on personal grievances seems, is there a personal grievance? Eugene interrupted, his tone still pleasant but eyes sharp. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Wade. I think what Wade means, I said carefully, is that every organization must evolve. Sometimes that means embracing new talent. Other times it means valuing institutional knowledge. The best companies do both. I clicked to my final slide. A detailed implementation plan with Wade as executive sponsor, reporting to the diversity committee. This gives everyone what they need, I explained. The company gets a revolutionary system. Newer employees gain wisdom from experienced mentors. Seasoned workers contribute meaningfully while learning new techniques, and management demonstrates real leadership by building bridges instead of divisions. Eugene studied the room, gauging reactions. I think we need time to discuss this proposal. Of course, I replied, gathering my materials. I'll wait outside. The hallway felt unnaturally quiet as I sat on a bench watching the clock. 28 minutes passed before the boardroom door opened. Eugene emerged first, his expression carefully neutral. We'd like you back in, he said. Inside, the executives had rearranged themselves. Wade now sat at the far end, his posture rigid. A notepad in front of him was covered with angry scribbles. We've discussed your proposal, Glenn began. While unconventional, we recognize tremendous value in both your efficiency system and suggested structural changes. For the next hour, we negotiated. They accepted the Age Diversity Committee, but wanted equal representation across age groups. They embraced the apprenticeship program, but wanted measurable success metrics. They agreed to respect training, but expanded it to include all forms of workplace diversity. Throughout it all, Wade remained silent, making occasional notes but offering no objections. When we finally reached agreement, Eugene stood. I believe we have a framework everyone can support. Howard, are you satisfied? I am, I confirmed. With one addition, I turned toward Wade. I want Mr. Foster to chair the implementation team, reporting directly to the diversity committee. The request sent another ripple through the room. I was essentially asking the guy who tried to push me out to report to the very people he'd marginalized. Wade looked up from his notepad, expression unreadable. May I ask why? Because you excel at driving change, I replied honestly. Your ability to transform systems is exactly what we need. Just applied with greater wisdom and inclusivity. He studied me for a long moment, searching for mockery or malice. Finding none, he nodded slowly. I accept. 2 days later, the Diversity Committee held its first meeting. 5 members. Myself, Wade, Perry, representing younger employees, Eugene for the board, and Beverly Lane from HR. Our charter, displayed prominently on the company intranet, outlined our mission to create a workplace valuing both innovation and experience. Our first task was addressing the systematic push-out of older workers. We reviewed terminations from the past 8 months, identified patterns of age discrimination, and developed a remediation plan. We should offer reinstatement to those wrongfully terminated, Perry suggested during our second meeting, with back pay and full benefits restoration, I added. Wade, who'd remained mostly quiet during initial discussions, cleared his throat. That creates significant financial liability. Less than the lawsuits brewing among former employees, I countered. Besides, my efficiency system will more than offset the costs. He nodded reluctantly. Valid point. Look, over the following weeks, I watched Wade navigate his new role with surprising adaptability. Initially stiff and defensive in committee meetings, he gradually began engaging substantively with our initiatives. But here's where it gets interesting. The guy wasn't just going through the motions, he was actually researching, learning, changing his whole approach. During one particularly productive session, he presented research on business benefits of age-diverse teams. Studies consistently show mixed-age teams outperform homogeneous groups in problem-solving and innovation, he explained, projecting charts. They bring complementary skills and perspectives. Interesting, I commented. What changed your mind about dinosaurs? The room tensed at my direct reference to his earlier insult. Wade met my gaze without flinching. Data, he replied simply. I was operating on assumptions rather than evidence. That was unprofessional. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was movement. The apprenticeship program launched next, pairing experienced employees with newer team members. The structure ensured bidirectional learning. Veterans shared institutional knowledge while younger workers offered fresh perspectives. Perry and I formed one such pair, During our first official session, he brought his laptop to my restored workstation in the main production area. "I've been struggling with the efficiency system you started," he admitted. "The underlying framework is more complex than anything I've worked with." "Show me where you're stuck," I offered. For the next hour, we worked through the processes together. I explained the reasoning behind certain structural choices while he suggested more elegant approaches to several functions. By session's end, we'd created something better than either of us could have developed alone. "This is actually working," he said, sounding surprised. "The mentorship program? Yes and no," he gestured between us. "This collaboration across experience levels. I always thought older workers would be stuck in their ways." "Some are," I acknowledged. "Just like some young workers think they know everything. Both mindsets limit growth. You know what?" The company atmosphere transformed gradually over the following months. Initial awkwardness gave way to genuine appreciation for diverse perspectives. Teams reorganized to include age ranges rather than clustering by generation. Productivity metrics, tracked meticulously through my efficiency system, showed steady improvement, but not everyone embraced the changes. 2 managers resigned rather than adapt to the new culture. Several younger employees chafed under mentorship requirements, viewing them as obstacles to advancement. We adjusted, refined, and persisted. Throughout this transformation, I watched Wade with particular interest. His evolution proved most surprising. The arrogant manager who dismissed older workers now advocated passionately for inclusive practices. During one implementation meeting, he confronted a supervisor who suggested sidelining an experienced machinist. "That's exactly the thinking we're working to eliminate," Wade said firmly. "Experience and innovation aren't mutually exclusive." After the meeting, I caught up with him in the hallway. "That was unexpected," I said. "Which part, your defense of inclusive practices? It seems genuine." He considered this as we walked. "When you've been publicly wrong about something fundamental, you have 2 choices. Double down on the mistake or learn from it." "I'm choosing to learn. That takes courage," I acknowledged. "Not as much as you think," he replied. "The data supporting diverse teams is overwhelming. Following evidence isn't courage, it's common sense." So anyway, 8 months after being labeled a dinosaur, I stood before the entire company at our quarterly meeting. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as I prepared to present results of our transformation. When we began this journey, I started. Many viewed it as correcting past wrongs. Others saw it as unnecessary disruption. Today I'm sharing numbers that speak for themselves. The screen behind me displayed our performance metrics. Productivity up 15%. Employee satisfaction increased by 28%. Turnover reduced by 38%. Innovation, measured by process improvements and cost savings, up 42%. These results weren't achieved by favoring one group over another, I continued. They came from recognizing that wisdom and fresh perspective both have value. That institutional memory and new approaches can coexist. That respect isn't just morally right, it's good business. From the stage, I could see Wade in the front row, nodding along. Beside him sat Perry, recently promoted to team lead while continuing his mentorship. Eugene watched from the back, expression proud but unsurprised. "We've proven age diversity isn't about political correctness or avoiding lawsuits," I concluded. "It's about building stronger, more resilient, more innovative operations, and we're just getting started." The applause was gratifying, but the real reward came after the presentation when employees across age groups approached with stories of how the new culture had improved their work lives. A machinist in his 50s described finally feeling valued again. A recent graduate shared how his mentor had helped navigate a complex client situation. A mid-career designer explained how collaboration with both younger and older colleagues had transformed her creative process. Later that afternoon, Wade knocked on my office door. He entered carrying a folder, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I wanted to discuss something before our next committee meeting," he began, sitting across from me. "Go ahead." "I've been researching best practices for sustaining diversity initiatives." He opened the folder, revealing extensive notes. "Data suggests that without ongoing structural support, organizations typically revert to previous patterns within 18 to 36 months. I raised an eyebrow. "You're worried our changes won't stick?" "I'm concerned about making them permanent," he corrected. "Which is why I've developed this proposal," he continued, handing me a document outlining a comprehensive sustainability plan. Quarterly culture audits, succession planning requiring diverse candidate slates, compensation tied to inclusivity metrics, ongoing education requirements. This is thorough, I acknowledged, scanning the implementation timelines. It needs to be, he replied. Cultural change is fragile without structural reinforcement. I studied him over the document. You've come a long way from calling people dinosaurs. Discomfort flashed across his face. I said things I regret, but never apologized directly. You're right, you haven't. He straightened in his chair. Howard, I apologize for my disrespectful and discriminatory behavior. It was unprofessional, harmful, and completely contrary to effective leadership. I'm sorry. The words hung between us. Simple, direct, and long overdue. Apology accepted, I replied, though your actions these past months spoke louder than words ever could. He nodded, seeming relieved. There's something else. I've been offered a position with another company. Better title, higher salary, significant equity package. Congratulations, I said, genuinely surprised. When do you leave? That's what I wanted to discuss. I'm declining the offer. Why? Sounds like a real opportunity. It is, he agreed. But they want me for what they called my aggressive modernization approach. They specifically mentioned admiring how I'd refreshed the workforce here before recent changes. Understanding dawned. They want the old Wade. Exactly. And that person no longer exists. He closed the folder. I've learned more here in 8 months than in my entire previous career. I'd rather build on that growth than return to outdated thinking, even for twice the money. Here's the thing that struck me. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The guy who once dismissed experienced workers as dinosaurs now viewed his former self as outdated. Well then, I said, we should discuss your role in the sustainability plan. If you're staying, I think you should lead it. His eyebrows rose. You trust me with that? 8 months ago? No. Today? Absolutely. I handed back his proposal. Present this at the next board meeting. I'll support it fully. So anyway, 1 year to the day after being called a dinosaur in that production meeting, I sat in the same conference room surrounded by a completely different company. The diversity committee had evolved into permanent governance with rotating membership. The apprenticeship program had expanded to include cross-departmental pairings. My efficiency system was fully implemented with ongoing improvements suggested by collaborating teams spanning multiple generations. Wade now served as VP of Operations, overseeing culture and talent development with focus on inclusive practices. Perry had been promoted to lead technical implementation of my system while continuing to learn from his mentor. And I kept developing new solutions that combined decades of experience with emerging technologies. As I looked around during our strategy session, I saw what real victory looked like. Not humiliation or termination or public shaming, but transformation. The guy who tried to push me out now championed the values he once dismissed. The company that allowed discrimination now led its industry in inclusive practices. The culture that devalued experience now recognized it as essential to innovation. Look, sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't retaliation but reformation. Not destroying your opponent but transforming them into an ally. Not winning a battle but changing the entire landscape. Eugene joined me for lunch in the company break room that afternoon, a space redesigned as part of our workplace wellness initiative. Gray-haired employees mentored younger colleagues at tables while recent graduates showed veterans new applications on their tablets. I never doubted you'd make an impact, Eugene said, watching the interactions around us. But even I didn't expect this level of transformation. Neither did I admitted. I just wanted to stop the discrimination. You did far more. He gestured toward the collaborative groups throughout the room. You created something sustainable, something that will outlast both of us. As I sat there, I realized he was right. My revenge hadn't been exposing my ownership or embarrassing Wade or even implementing my efficiency system. It had been demonstrating that respect for experience isn't just morally right, it's essential for innovation. That wisdom and fresh perspectives both matter. That true power comes not from position or title, but from creating systems that ensure every voice contributes to success. You know what the best part was? 6 months later, Wade presented our diversity model at a national manufacturing conference. Companies from across the country started implementing similar programs. What began as one man's response to workplace discrimination became a blueprint for cultural transformation in American manufacturing. The efficiency system I developed saved the company $2.8 million in its first year, even more than projected. But more importantly, it proved that innovation doesn't require discarding institutional knowledge. The most breakthrough solutions came from teams that combined decades of practical experience with fresh analytical approaches. Perry, now 30 and running his own department, still stops by my workstation twice a week. We've developed 3 new process improvements together, each one building on lessons learned from the previous generation while incorporating cutting-edge techniques. He calls it legacy innovation, honoring what worked while constantly improving. Last month, a young engineer approached me with a problem she couldn't solve. "I heard you're the guy who knows how things really work around here," she said. I smiled, remembering a time when that would have been said dismissively. Now it was said with respect. "I know some things," I replied. What are you working on?" As we dove into her project, I thought about everything that had changed. Wade still leads our sustainability initiatives, having turned down 3 more lucrative offers to stay and build something meaningful. The company culture has become a model for the industry. And I've learned that the most satisfying victories aren't about beating your opponents. They're about creating systems so good that everyone wins. 3 years later, when people ask me about that Monday morning when I was called a dinosaur, I tell them it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because I got my revenge, but because it forced me to think bigger than just getting even. It made me realize that real change doesn't come from destroying people who think differently. It comes from showing them a better way. That's not just revenge. That's revolution. And sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. I learned that the strongest people aren't those who can tear others down, but those who can lift everyone up, including the people who once stood against them. Real power isn't about proving you're right. It's about creating a world where being wrong becomes the first step toward being better.